Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Saturday, August 7th, Sunday, August 8th for those of you across the pond and beyond. Welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm so glad you guys could join us tonight. I am your host, TessaTNT, and I am so happy to be here. To be honest with you, I am super drained. We had a gender reveal party today for my eldest daughter, and it was really something. My 17-year-old daughter and myself were the only ones who knew the gender, and she did such a good job not saying anything about it whatsoever. Nobody even knew that she knew. But everybody voted on what they thought it'd be, a he or she, and we popped the balloon and did the little confetti popper as well at the same time, and oh my gosh, if you guys are friends with me, please go to my Facebook page and watch this video that I shared. The amount of excitement on Gabe's face, and he cried, which made me cry, and I still want to cry. It was so cute and so sweet. I just really loved it. But yeah, it was very draining, but there's no way that I was going to do a replay. I'm just like, nope, I gotta be here with my peeps, and we're going to do this. So if you're listening live right now, you're listening on Spreaker.com. You can also find us live right now on KPNL Radio, which you can find at kpnl-db.com. We're also found on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Tumblr, YouTube, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, as well as Podcast Chaser. So like I said, it's just me and you guys. We're just going to hang out and read this book. But really quick, I want you guys to hear the audio on this, because even the audio, that's going to stay with me forever. The way he screamed and just his reaction, it was just freaking priceless. And you're going to hear somebody say, Mango, Mango. So there's a family dog there named Mango that is Gabriel's mother and sister's dog. But here we go. Listen to this. This is awesome. Did you hear Kinsey? She's like, "Are you crying?" And he's the one that was like, oh my gosh, he did this arm gesture, and he kept repeating. I almost ran around and did laps, but then I saw Kinsey and I realized she wanted a girl, so I just had to go over and hug her. But yeah, he was basically crying, which made us all cry. I'm trying not to cry right now, but it was super sweet. Oh my goodness. That's the happiest guy on earth right now. Alright, hold on. Whew. Okay, so the book we're going to be reading from tonight is 50 Strange Stories of the Supernatural, True Accounts of Weird and Otherworldly Happenings, and this book is edited by John Canning. Hold on, I can't see. I have tears. That was super cute. Oh my gosh. They're so happy. I hope it lasts. Very important. Okay, so in this book, we have already gone through the first chapter, which was The Mysterious Orient. Now we are on the second chapter, or section, which is A Coven of Witches. Hello, Mr. Diecast J and Mr. Jim Moore. So great to see you guys in the chat room right now. If you guys want to come over to the chat room, go to Spreaker.com, look for We Are Paradox Media, and you're free to join there. Oh man. I'm going to have to mute my mic really quick so I can blow my nose, because I don't want to be sniffling through this story. Got a little emotional there. My nose is a little runny. Give me a moment. So Diecast J in the chat room was just saying there are new race videos as well. You can find him on Facebook under Diecast in Racing, as well as on YouTube. They have their very own YouTube channel. And man, oh man, we got Mr. Jim Morris from the UK. We have Jazz and Miss Sandra, the Canadians from Canada. And then we have myself from Colorado. We have, I keep wanting to say Sleepy. We have Diecast J, Arizona. We got a lot of different people that tune in and check it out. And I love it. Like, it's a good way to spend your time. I remember as a kid making my own tracks in the dirt and playing with my Matchbox cars or my Hot Wheels cars. It was a good way to spend time. And I still love it. Okay, so this first story is called Canewdon, and it says, there are still wild and lonely areas of Essex where the marshy ground makes civilized living difficult or impossible, and where the winds whistle unchecked over the Thames estuary. Many roads lead only to lonely villages and no further, and although Essex has been saved from the sea of concrete, which would have surrounded the proposed Maplin Airport urban development, was smothered, like a parasitic creeper, many of the smaller villages. It is difficult now to imagine how isolated and inward-looking they were only a century ago, how remote from the bustling city, the advances of technology, and the advent of the Age of Reason. The part of southeast Essex, which is bordered on the east by the North Sea, on the south by the River Thames, and on the north by the Crouch, is still known as Witch Country. For hundreds of years, the tradition of witchcraft flourished in this area. It was the scene of many notable witch hunts and trials which reached their peak in the 16th century, and of a remarkable belief in witches that persisted into the 20th. This belief in witches isn't as old as time. It appears again and again in legends of prehistoric and in the oldest records of man. It is based on superstition and fear and lack of understanding, and much of the powers ascribed to the witches of the past who ended their lives miserably on a scaffold can be attributed in a perfectly straightforward fashion to natural facts since proven by science. In 1486, however, a definitive work, the famous Malus Maleficarum, Hammer of the Witches, was written by two Dominican monks. It was, in effect, a handbook for witch hunters, and it sets out quite clearly the manner in which witches collaborate with the devil, their pact being essentially a willing one, and how their existence is maintained by the activities of succubi or incubi. It explains that celestial bodies play a large part in the casting of spells, and that the vast majority of spells are connected with sexual activities, since women are naturally more lascivious than men. The book then discusses the powers of witches and how they may be counteracted, and describes the rituals which witches carry out. Finally, the authors advise the reader as to how to discover and try witches, describing the kinds of evidence that can safely be accepted as proof of a witch's guilt. Malleus Maleficarum remained the authoritative book on witches for over 200 years, during which period 3 witchcraft acts were passed in England. The last case of witchcraft to be tried in England took place in Leicestershire. Leicestershire? In 1717. The prisoners, a woman and her son and daughter, underwent the usual tests for witchcraft but were set free. In 1735, the statute against witchcraft was repealed. Those who persecuted witches were endangered themselves, but throughout the century, there were occasional cases of local people attempting to revenge themselves on women they believed were witches. The Age of Reason, born during the century through the writings of Thomas Paine and other liberal philosophers reached the cities of the following century, but it failed to affect much of the countryside where the uneducated men and women continued to believe in magic and witchcraft and in the traditional ways of countering and counteracting it. In 1880, 2 men were convicted of trying to submit a woman to the swimming ordeal because she had bewitched their bed, which rocked and swayed at night. In 1945, a murder which took place in Warwickshire was believed to have been a ritual witch murder, and associated with another murder of a man believed to have been a witch, which took place in 1875. The scene of this murder, Long Compton, was a traditional association with witchcraft. An ancient saying claims that there are enough witches in Long Compton to push a wagon load of hay up Long Compton Hill. This brief glimpse into the history of and the persistence of belief in witchcraft makes the story of Canudon appear a little less incredible, although some of the stories connected with the village have over the centuries become distorted beyond credulity. Canudon lies about 6 miles north of Southend in the flat marshy country close to the River Crouch. It is in the heart of the witch country, and tradition says that as long as the church tower stands there, must always be 6 witches in Canudon, 3 in silk and 3 in cotton. And of these 6, one must traditionally be the parson's wife, one the butcher's wife, and one the baker's wife. When the last witch dies, the church tower is doomed to fall, or, if the tower falls, the witches will die. Canudon church tower stands squat and strong among the encroaching houses of townsfolk who have moved into Canudon, and legend still persists along Canudon's reputation for evil. Although Canudon is rapidly becoming urbanized, this is a comparatively recent change, and until quite recently, children danced 7 times round the church as a precaution against witchcraft. There are still villagers who prefer not to go near the churchyard, nor to pass near certain crossroads at night. There is a good reason for this fear, for a witch who long ago paid the penalty for her wickedness was buried at the crossroads with a stake through her heart. Now her ghost emerges as a shadowy cloud from the churchyard and makes its way, always following the same route, towards the river, and has only been seen at certain fixed points on the road. The specter appears some 50 yards before the riverbank, for ghosts cannot cross water. A visitor to Canudon reported this ghost some 20 years ago, but the details were different. He said he met what appeared to be a woman wearing a crinoline and poke bonnet on the road leading to the river. She was moving apparently at abnormal speed and floating above the ground. As she drew near, some mysterious force lifted the terrified visitor from his feet and flung him down, and he saw that the figure had no face beneath the bonnet. Despite the fact that ghosts cannot cross water, this same woman has more recently been seen in the lounge of the old ferry house on the far side of the river, and minus both bonnet and head. The ghost does no harm, occasionally opening and shutting windows, hovering on the stair or beside the fireplace in the lounge, and sometimes creeping into empty beds and breathing heavily. Things being as they are, the ghost is now regarded by the owner of the house as a social asset, but the local inhabitants are still convinced that it is the ghost of the executed witch. Another headless specter, however, has been reported in Canudon, which could be the crinolined lady. The story is told that Charles Needham, a London barrister who, in 1895, recuperating from an illness, rented a small cottage on the edge of the quiet and charming village. The servants whom he hired to look after him during the day seemed concerned by the fact that he was willing to sleep alone in the house, but for some nights he was undisturbed. Then one night he was startled to see that someone seemed to be trying to latch the back door. Charles Needham hurried to the front door, which was unbolted, and as he slid the bolts he saw the latch rise and fall too. Undaunted, Needham opened the door, but there was nobody there. Thinking he was the victim of children's pranks, Needham said nothing. But one night, after he had been playing chess with the village doctor, his host offered to drive him back to his cottage. The horse reached the entrance of the lane leading to the cottage and obstinately refused to go any further, and so Needham, unwilling to trouble his friend, walked the rest of the way home alone. As he came up the lane, he saw a small light ahead of him and at one side of the road, and thinking it was some other person also alone in his lonely spot at midnight, he hurried to catch him up. Close to his cottage, a figure stepped out into the moonlight, remained quite still for a few moments, and then turned towards him. Horrified, Needham saw that it was a woman without a head. He ran all the way to the pub, where he was greeted without surprise by the villagers, who told him that the ghost was a familiar one. It was that of a woman whose husband, believing her to be a witch, had murdered and decapitated her many years ago. Well, what the heck? It says I'm muted? Oh, okay. He says it's okay now. I was like, holy shnikes, I could see my voice bouncing. That is so weird. I wonder what happened. I wonder if I buffered or something. But what was I going to say about that? I don't know. I don't recall. I got thrown off by the being muted. I'm like, oh no! Alright, so let's see. Wait. Yeah, what a good excuse to kill your wife. Yeah, this broad's a witch, so yeah, I had to cut her head off and be rid of her. Okay, so here it says, another of Canadan's legends, and one which is remarkably persistent despite its fantastic nature, is the story of the witch who stole the church bell and then rowed across the river in it, using feathers for oars. The bell capsized and the witch was drowned, and on stormy days, the bell may occasionally be heard tolling beneath the water. The witch's body was recovered and buried beside the river at a spot where an area of barren ground was known as the Witches' Field. Here it is said the witches could be seen meeting to renew their powers after flying to their rendezvous on the riverbank. Canadan was not only one of the last places in which the traditional belief in witches survived, but also the home of one of the last masters of witches. Canadan legend maintains that their witches have a master. This old man, George Pickingdale, died in 1909, aged 93. That's pretty old for back in that day. Generally, people didn't really live that long. So this old man, he died in 1909, aged 93. Pickingdale was both a black and white magician, and while he was much feared by the villagers who dared not disobey him for fear of what he might do in reprisal, he would also charm their warts and was sometimes called in to settle their disputes. He used his reputation to exploit the villagers, who were convinced that he had the power to summon the local witches by means of a wooden whistle, and that he could bewitch the threshing machinery if he felt so inclined. On the other hand, if he did choose to work, he could summon up a whole bevy of imps who would do it all for him while he sat in the shade smoking his pipe. Now ain't that something? When George Pickingdale died, it was said that he passed his power on to his son. But since nothing has been heard of him, it must be assumed that he no longer exercises it. This need to pass on power is one to which Canadian witches were continually subject, as was the familiar peculiar to them, the white mouse and their unique ability to immobilize wills. Stories are told of Canadian witches who could not die until someone accepted the power which they had to pass on. The witches' familiars were often the repositories of this, and as the belief in witchcraft began to decline, it is said that one old woman, lying in agony and unable to leave the power which held her bound to this earth, finally gave a low whistle at which a number of white mice appeared from a box. The old woman then died, but the mice refused to leave the body of the witch and had to be buried with her. Sometimes the witches' familiars had to be burned to prevent the power being passed on to their children willy-nilly. Canadian witches were also able to enchant wheels of carts and wagons, and a tradition persisted well into the 20th century that it was unlucky to take a bicycle into Canada, for it would surely suffer a puncture. A Mr. Whitcutt, late rector of Foulness Island, told the story of a wagoner who had refused to buy some beer for a Canadian woman. Afterwards, he found that his horses couldn't move, and that however much he whipped them, they were unable to get the wagon rolling. The wagoner's mate, however, was a local man and knew his witches, so he told the wagoner it was no use hitting the horses. Try hitting the wheels. The wagoner did so, and the Canadian witch emerged screaming, the marks of the whip on her face. The belief that witches could transform themselves into wheels was fairly widespread, but it was perhaps only the villagers of a place like Canada who became adept in dealing with witches. There was a strong tradition of witches having been ducked into the village pond, and the local people soon learnt the rudiments of white magic and knew that the best way to keep witches out of the house was to put a knife or a pair of scissors under the doormat. Well, that's interesting. I've never heard that one. I guess I'll have to get a doormat and put some scissors or a knife under there, just to be extra safe. So another remedy against witchcraft was the witch bottle, and this may be said to be the specialty of a white magician. Cunning Murrell, who lived in Hudley, close to Canada. Murrell was well known as an astrologer, had considerable skill with simples and what might now be called faith healing, and by means of a magic mirror could trace lost property or find missing people. It is said that he could also foresee the future, but he was a kindly man, and when one of his clients asked him to foretell the next 10 years, he persuaded her he could not see that far. He foretold accurately her life for 8 years, and in the 9th year, she died. Cunning Murrell was often called in to help when witchcraft was suspected. During the 1850s, a young girl fell foul of an old gypsy woman who she had treated brusquely. Soon afterwards, the girl was attacked by fits which followed all the traditional signs of a bewitchment. She ran about on all fours, had convulsions, barked like a dog, and so on. Cunning Murrell confirmed that this was a case of witchcraft and prepared one of his witch bottles, iron bottles made for him by the village blacksmith, which were filled with a mixture consisting of blood and urine of the victim, together with some hair, herbs, and pins. This was then boiled on the cottage fire at midnight in order to draw the witch to the scene of her crime. Soon, footsteps were heard outside and the voice of an old woman crying out in agony, "For God's sake, stop! You're killing me!" At that moment, the bottle exploded, and they usually did, sometimes causing a good deal of damage to property, and the voice outside ceased. From that time on, the girl began to recover, while some days later, the body of an old gypsy woman, badly burned, was discovered some miles away. Cunning Muriel dealt with another witch by telling her victim to follow her to her home, thrusting a knife into the witch's footprints. The woman hopped all the way home in agony, cursing her assailant. Muriel's success in such matters was such that he was credited with being a master of witches, such as Pickingale, with the powers to command the woman to obey. It is said that he once demonstrated his power by taking part in a contest with a witch in Canada. For some time, neither party seemed to be gaining the upper hand until at last Muriel commanded the witch to die, which she promptly did. Wow, so glad that she complied, I guess. I don't know, that's weird. In 1860, Cunning Muriel died, one of the last of the cunning men of England. In true witch tradition, white or black, he tried to pass his power on to his son, who was, however, quite unworthy. His father having so sadly neglected properly to bring him up to be his heir that he could not even read. Cunning Muriel left behind him a quantity of books on astronomy and astrology, methods of preparing amulets, and so on. All these books actually survived until 1956, when, save one, they were destroyed as being worthless. The first documented witch of Canada was Rose Pye, spelled P-Y-E, who was tried in 1580 and acquitted. The last 6 witches that have been documented lived around the 1880s and were described by those who remembered them only some 20 years ago. One of them was well known to bewitch wagon wheels and to possess imps. Another inflicted plagues of lice on those who annoyed her. A third fixed people with glaring eyes and prevented them from entering the church. The fourth was a cripple who cast spells and was loath for her venomous temper. Another was not unkind, but occasionally terrified her neighbors by materializing at their bedside and peering fiercely at them from beneath her poke bonnet, while the sixth betrayed herself as a witch by refusing to step over a doormat beneath which a steel knife was hidden. Busted! It is said that by the turn of the century, the situation had so deteriorated or improved that jam jars of urine had replaced the complicated brew and the iron witch bottles used by Cunning Muriel. And certainly today, the witches of Canada are as hard to find as is the old village. The remains of Pickingale's cottage, which eventually fell down since nobody would live in it after his death, have long since been swept away, and the inhabitants scoff on or become irritated, or exploit the old tales according to their own interests. Modern witchcraft would find little sympathy with the old witchcraft of Canada, and the modern Satanists are a different cult again. Reason seems at last to have driven the witches out of Canada, but there is perhaps just enough of the inexplicably supernormal to make one think. At Canada, the persistence of the tales and the ghost stories is interesting, despite the urbanization. And I know that when I came out of Canadian church, after having had a look at the carved witch's cat in the old altar tomb, where it is said the children used to listen to the devil rattling his chains, I found that my car had its first puncture for over 5 years. So this one is called The Ship That Was Cursed. Just going to take a drink real quick like. I'm feeling a little parched. They made a macabre outline against the sky and the sea, the 3 wild-haired women, the child, and the big black dog. A man watched them from a distance. They held strange objects in their hands, little images of men and of a ship, all made of clay. One of the women screamed out a series of curses, and the images were flung into the water. A sudden storm blew up. The water seemed to turn red for an instant, and a real ship many miles away was doomed. Leader of the women was Margaret Barclay, who sought revenge against John Dean, her brother-in-law, and his friend Provost Tran. They were both aboard that ship, and she wished them dead. The year was 1618, and her anger against them had started some months back. John, I'm going to say Dine, because it's D-E-I-N, Dine, Dane. It's not Dean, for sure. Dine. And his wife had accused Margaret of theft, and Provost Tran had supported them. So she had them up for the slander in church and court of the district of Irvine, Ayrshire, where they all lived. The court ordered a reconciliation. Margaret was commanded to shake hands with her sister-in-law before the assembled company. She obeyed, but declared afterwards, "I only shook hands with her because the court said I must. I haven't forgiven her or her husband, and I never shall." John Dane, of the ship's captain, his vessel with a full complement of sailors, was due to sail for France on a commercial venture. Provost Tran was going with him to handle the business side of things, and when they reached France, 2 other merchants were accompanying them. Margaret said before witnesses, "A curse upon that ship. I pray God that it will sink to the bottom of the sea, and all on board are eaten up by crabs." Then she set her mind to the business of making sure that the ship did sink. Secretly, in the hope that she would never be found out, she began to experiment with magic. The ship sailed. Time passed. There was no news. Then a rumor began to circulate. It was started by a roving juggler and conjurer who made a precarious living by performing magic tricks. His name was John Stewart. He visited Mrs. Tran, and they chatted about her husband, the provost. "I am so looking forward to his return," she said. "Are you sure that he will return?" asked Stewart. "Of course. He's been on voyages before." "There's always a last voyage, Mrs. Tran." "What do you mean? Tell me. As the provost's wife, I have the right to know." "The provost's wife? The provost's widow, more like it," said Stewart. Frightened, Mrs. Tran made further inquiries, and Stewart's prophecy turned out to be true. 2 sailors who had sailed on the ship came back. They said that she had been wrecked on the English coast near Padstow, and they were the only survivors. All the others had been drowned. Now people thought back to Margaret's curse on the ship and wondered if she'd had anything to do with it. Then there was John Stewart with his warnings. Had those 2 been in league together and sunk the ship by witchcraft? The city magistrates and ministers came to question Stewart. "What dealings have you had with Margaret Barclay?" "No dealings. She came to me for advice, that's all." "What sort of advice?" "She wanted me to teach her how to work magic to make her wishes come true." "And what were her wishes?" "She wished for revenge on those who'd wronged her, but I told her I had no magic arts, so I couldn't help her." After further questioning and with some torture involved, he changed his story. "I knew Margaret Barclay well. Shortly after the ship sailed, I went to her house. I found her there with 2 other women, and they were making clay figures." "Did the figures resemble anyone?" "One of them was fair and handsome like Provost Tran. Also, they molded a ship of clay. While they were doing it, the devil came to keep them company. He came in the shape of a big black dog." "And then what happened?" "When the clay ship and the figures were ready, the 3 women and the devil dog went to an empty house near the seaport. He took them to the shore and pointed out the house. They gathered there, Then they all went down to the water's edge, called out curses, and flung the figures of the shipmen into the sea. I watched them. As soon as the figures sank, the sea stormed and raged, and the water turned red, red as juice in a dyer's cauldron. Now the magistrates lined up a number of Margaret's women friends for an identity parade. John Stewart, you said there were 2 women with Margaret Barclay. Are they here? He studied the line of frightened women, then pointed an accusing finger. She's one. The woman, Isabel Inch, screamed in protest. No, it's a lie. I've never seen that man before in my life. But the inquisitors did not believe her. They dragged her away and shut her up in the church belfry, then turned their attention to her daughter. This was a little girl of 8 years old who lived in Margaret's house as a servant and helped her to look after her baby. She was asked if she had seen the clay figures being made. Yes, I was there, said the child. Was you mother, Isabel Inch, there too? She was. Who else? A girl. I don't know her name. She lives in the town. We went to the house by the shore, then down to the water, and threw the clay images into it. They asked her about the black dog. Oh, yes, a dog came with us, a great black dog, with flashes of light coming out of its nose and mouth. It gave us light while the spell was being cast, to make the ship sink and all aboard her drown. All this is very wicked and terrible, the men told her. Why didn't you speak of it before? I promised Margaret Barclay that I wouldn't. She said that if I kept quiet, she'd give me a new pair of shoes. The magistrates returned to John Stewart. Why hadn't he mentioned the presence of a child? I didn't think to, he said, but the little Snatchet was there all right. Meantime, the little Snatchet's mother was still shut up in the belfry tower, and she was in a state of panic. She knew what happened to those accused of witchcraft. When the magistrates came to question her, at first she denied everything. Then she realized that her daughter had given her away and admitted that she had been there. But I was only a bystander, she said. I did no ill wishes upon anyone. Isabel Inch, do you have supernatural powers? She hesitated. If she said no, they wouldn't believe her. If she said yes, she would be admitted that she was a witch. She thought of a way to get round them, or so she hoped. She looked at one of her inquisitors, who was a sailor, and said, I have supernatural powers. If you let me go free, you will never have a bad voyage in all your life to come. My powers will keep you safe. This statement quieted them, for although she was afraid of them, and they had worldly power, they were also afraid of her and all her kind, because of whatever secret powers she might possess. We will return tomorrow, they said, at last, to hear your full confession of sorcery. Promise that tomorrow you will confess. I promise, said Isabel. They left her alone again. She brooded over tomorrow. If she broke her promise and refused to confess, they could keep her prisoner here for years. A living death. If she did confess, she would be executed as a witch. She had to escape. She was heavily fettered. A normal person would have been unable to move under the weight of those chains, even though they were unattached to the walls. But Isabel, with superhuman strength, managed to climb out of the back window in the tower and onto the roof. Open sky and solitude gave her an illusion of freedom. Brief illusion. She was soon seen by people below, gazing up at her. They gathered, murmuring about the church. She was as trapped in space as surely as she had been trapped in the tower room. She dragged herself from one side of the roof to the other, missed her footing, tumbled, rolled nearer and nearer to the edge of the roof, and finally she crashed to the ground. The crowd converged on her helpless figure. They carried her to bed. No friends came. They were all afraid of being involved with her now, but the magistrates came to her bedside with more questions. Badly hurt and in pain, she not only refused to confess fully, but withdrew her previous admission. I am innocent, she declared. Leave me alone. On the 5th day after her fall, she died. It was believed that she had obtained poison somehow and poisoned herself. So Isabel Inch was free, but Margaret Barclay and John Stewart remained to face the music. A day was fixed for their ritual and trial for witchcraft. Stewart was imprisoned in solitary confinement. Half an hour before the trial was due to begin, the magistrates and ministers came to urge him to beg God for mercy, to release him from his bonds to the devil. Stewart gave in and did as they asked. He was suffering from the weight of chains on him. I am so heavily fettered that I can't raise my hand to my head or bread to my mouth, he said. They left him apparently unable to move hand or foot, but when his guards returned, they found that he had hanged himself from a hook on the door. He had used a string either from his headwear or his garter. The hook was not high, and his feet dangled only a little above floor level. How he had managed to do it, chained as he was, no one knew. The guards cut string, laid him on the floor, and tried to retrieve him and revive him. They were too late. John Stewart had cheated his executioners and juggled his way to freedom by dying. Now only Margaret Barclay was left to stand trial for sinking the ship. They determined to get a confession out of her, so put her to torture, using what was known as the safe and gentle torture. Sounds pretty creepy. She had to put her bare legs in the stocks, and 1 by 1 iron bars were placed on them until the weight became unbearable. For each admission of witchcraft she made, a bar would be removed. For each denial, a bar would be added. As the pain in her legs became excruciating, she cried out, take them off, I'll tell you everything." The bars were removed. "I have nothing to tell," she said now. "I am innocent." The bars were replaced. Again she screamed that she would tell all if they were lifted. "If you'll clear the court, I'll confess only to the justice themselves," she said. "I will confess truly before God." So the court was cleared of all but justices, and the torture ceased. Margaret confessed, "I pray for the mercy of God and the destruction of the devil, my old master. I did destroy John Dyne's ship. I hoped to kill only John Dyne himself and Provost Tran, but not the rest of the crew." Then she added, "But it was Isabel Crawford's doing as much as mine." Isabel Crawford, a new name in the proceedings, this was the third woman whose identity had been secret so far. The trial was delayed while Isabel Crawford was found and questioned. She said that she was guilty of the crime of witchcraft, but said that Margaret Barclay had been the ringleader. She herself had been no more than an accomplice. With this new evidence to hand, Margaret's trial continued. Until this moment, her husband had kept well out of it, but now he must have felt some smattering of loyalty towards his wife, for he turned up in court for the first time and bought a lawyer to act on her behalf. This revived hope in Margaret. "Do you wish to be defended by a lawyer?" she was asked. "As you please," she said, adding spiritedly, "My confession was made in an agony of torture. Before God, all that I said under torture was false and untrue. I am innocent." Let me look down here. I'm going to catch up on the messages. "Hello, beautiful Sister Sandra." Aww. "Sandra's doing a family barbecue. I hope she brings me a plate." That'd be awesome. It'll be a little cold and yucky by the time she gets here, but, nonetheless, it's the thought that counts. Alright, so let's see. The jury now had to decide whether her confession had been true or whether it had been an untruth forced from her by torture. They were sure that she was guilty, yet it was true that she had been tortured. They got round this difficulty by saying that at the moment of her confession, the iron bars had not actually been lying on her legs, so she did not confess under torture at all. Therefore, she was brought in guilty of witchcraft and condemned to death. Margaret had fought hard to save her own life, but now that the battle was lost, she had no longer protested her innocence. She said that her previous confession had been true and that she had been a servant of the devil for a long time, and that she had caused the ship to sink by making the clay images, casting a spell, and flinging them into the water. "I was responsible for it all," she admitted in her last hours, "and Isabel Crawford is innocent. I beg you, set her free." She died a witch's death, being strangled at the stake, and her body afterwards being burned to ashes. Her dying wish, however, was ignored. Isabel Crawford was not set free. A confession was demanded of her, and she suffered the same torture as Margaret. For although she had admitted some guilt when first arrested, now she was declaring her innocence. Isabel Crawford proved to have an immense capacity for enduring pain. She received 30 stone of weight on her legs without crying out for mercy. Her torturers began to wonder if she would ever give in. These witches were made of stern stuff. The devil aided them, perhaps. Then, instead of adding more weight to her legs, they shifted the bars to another position so that they rested on a different part of her legs. A new searing agony was awakened, and it broke her. Take them off, I'll confess." The cruel weights were removed. She confessed that she had been in league with Margaret Barclay, the witch, and a servant of the devil for years. She was sentenced to death. At this point, she behaved quite differently from Margaret. Whereas the latter had fully admitted her witchcraft once her life was forfeit and she had nothing to lose. Isabel denied her confession, extorted from her in such pain. She remained defiant up to the moment of her execution. When she stood at the stake and the minister was praying for her soul, she interrupted him. "I am innocent. You judges are the guilty ones." It was the custom for a person condemned to death to pardon the executioner. This Isabel Crawford refused to do. "Pardon you? Never. I am innocent. You are guilty." Shortly afterwards, innocent or guilty, she was no more than a handful of ashes and a stench of burning in the air. Thus the 4 people who had conspired to sink a ship by their black magic arts were all terribly punished, and they all died by violence, 2 by suicide, 2 by strangulation and burning. Margaret Barclay was the most powerful of the 4 and deeply aware of her own powers, as she showed by her final confession. She had wanted to destroy and had succeeded. She had the knack of getting other people to do as she wished, for all her accomplices knew what a dangerous game they were playing and the dreadful penalty if they were caught. They were murderers from a distance, using a method of murder which, because it is so nebulous and inexplicable, is even more terrifying than the human brutality of a blow, a shot, or a stab. Human brutality showed clearly enough among those who accused, tortured, and executed the witches. Fear of those dark powers made them cruel. They believed that they were fighting against the power of the devil and his servants on earth. Ironically, as in all wars, they did evil things in their battle against evil. So in that little Ayrshire town, the devil had a victory either way. For his old servants were destroyed, he soon found new ones among the destroyers. As for the big black dog, which had kept the witches company in the house and on the seashore, there is no record of it being seen again in those parts. Very nice. So on that note, you guys, we are going to go to our first musical break. On this break, and both of our breaks, we have Miss Mia Savage, who has her own YouTube channel and Facebook page. Sorry guys, I'm trying to get this cover on here. I think I should just take this off while I'm reading this because I don't want to mess it up. But Music for Savages is her YouTube and Facebook page. You can also find her under Mia Savage. And the songs she will be singing for this break is Not a Phase, Singing to Your Grave, The Bottom Line, Bury Me in Heaven, and I believe that's it. Yes, the next ones are for next music break, but you guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Break us out of this cycle. choice right now between fear and love.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. That was Miss Mia Savage, and I was incorrect. I said Music for Savages, but the name of The page that you want to look at is called Antidote for Savages, and you can find this on Spotify and many other sites. So make sure you go and check her out. She just uploaded a brand new track this very evening. So definitely go over there, check it out, give it a listen. I really love her music. I don't know. Maybe I'm just particular because I really love her. She's amazing. She's an amazing individual. Alright, so let us carry on with our chapter on A Coven of Witches. A section, because it's got different chapters within the section, so let's call it a section. And the name of this story is The Brothers and the Witch. So many of the well-confirmed tales of supernatural have as their setting either the extreme north or the extreme south of the British Isles, that one is inclined towards the theory that occult and supernatural beings prefer the wilder coastal settings. Be that as it may, the following events have been told so often and are so familiar and firmly established in local lore that many Cornishmen believe in their reality as firmly as they do in the historical reality of, say, the Duke of Wellington, who, it just so happens, was achieving high fame at the time. It was an autumn evening in the year 1810, and the town was Helston, where the Lizard Peninsula can be said to begin. The peninsula leads down the Lizard Point, the most southerly feature of England's mainland. Helston is the home of the famous Flora dance and was later in the century to claim as one of its sons the boxer Bob Fitzsimmons. Two apprentice saddlers, Charlie and Jim Williams, were in their attic bedroom in one of the roads off the steep high street, rather uncomfortably perched on the stools. "But what's wrong, Charlie?" "Nothing, it's nothing at all. Just that I'm not tired. I don't see why, just because we're apprentices, we have to be in bed by 9. I could stay up for hours. We could have a game of cards. Now, couldn't we?" Jim, the elder brother, all of 13 years, but a strapping lad, almost a man, looked at his 11-year-old younger brother. Why, if ever a boy needed 8 hours between the blankets, it was little Charlie Williams. There were great black shadows under each eye, and complexion was pale, almost gray. "Never mind, Charlie. I think Mr. and Mrs. Carver know what's best for you, and in a year or two we'll be our own masters, able to get the bed when we want." "I suppose so, but I still don't want to go to bed, not here in the Carver's house. I have terrible dreams, Jim." "That's because you ate too much last night. A huge great slab of Mrs. Carver's bread and cheese isn't the thing to dream on. And washed down with her ale? You're too young for that. Just try cutting down on the grub." "Oh, all right." Young Charlie threw the last bit of bread and cheese into the fireplace. It had taken the boys a month or so to get used to the Carvers. Helston was quite some distance from their home at Marazion, and Mr. Carver had at first seemed gruff, almost hostile, and definitely so when the boys made stupid mistakes. "Saddler can't suffer fools gladly, lad. It's more than the business is worth, having shoddy work turned out." But a moment later, Mr. Carver was all smiles. "I'm sorry, lads. I get a bit gruff sometimes, but I like the pair of you. Sure you're getting enough to eat?" "Oh, yes, sir, and thank you. Mrs. Carver, it was a beautiful supper, really it was." And cozy Mrs. Carver, roughly as wide as she was high, would then embrace the boys in turn. So it was a happy enough life, but this new hatred of going to bed, which was being shown by Charlie Williams, worried his elder brother. He would lie in the bed next to him, unable to sleep himself, while the younger brother seemed to fight the onslaught of sleep. Usually, Jim was asleep before the muttering and rolling in the next bed had stopped. The next morning, he was, for the first time, horrified at his younger brother's appearance. The boy was ashen, and his lips were trembling so that he could hardly speak. "Now, Charlie, you must tell me, what are these dreams you're having?" "It's nothing. Tonight, well, I won't have any supper at all, not a morsel, and if I have the same dream, I'll tell you about it." "The same dream? Why do you always have the same one?" "Yes." "But you've got to tell me now the dreams are exactly the same?" "Not exactly, but almost, and they're awful." The older boy's dismay, young Charlie burst into tears and cried as if his heart would break. Jim held him tight, and eventually the weeping stopped. "I'm sorry. Just being a crybaby." "No, you're not. We all get to cry a little now and then, but you mark my words. If you're like this tomorrow morning, I'm betting Mr. Carver to fetch the doctor. He'll give you some physic, and that'll put you right." "Very well. Tell you about it tomorrow, if it happens again." The day passed fairly uneventfully, except the dog tired. Charlie made more mistakes than usual, and Mr. Carver was obviously holding himself in rein. Jim took him aside. "It'll be all right, Mr. Carver, sir. Charlie just hasn't been sleeping, and if it's the same tonight, I'll ask you if you'd be getting the physician to see him." "Physician? But don't you think, Jim, my lad, that it's maybe just homesickness? I could always send him home to your parents for a few days. There's a stagecoach or diligence leaves quite often." "I don't think it's homesickness, Mr. Carver." Mr. Carver was concerned. Perhaps the boy was not getting enough to eat and drink, and that would be a terrible disgrace. Mrs. Carver would make sure he got a really good supper from now on, and though he didn't approve of young lads having much ale at the best of times, being a mug or two more if it might give the lad a good night's sleep certainly did for him. An extra quart, and he slept as if he'd been hit with the blacksmith's hammer. That is, until he had to get up and run some of it off, of course. He intimated these thoughts to Jim. "Well, see, sir, I think maybe tonight he ought to have a very light supper, just as a tryout, you might say, and then I'll tell you about it in the morning." The night the two brothers went to bed at the usual hour, both of them rather hungry. For at least half an hour Jim Williams stayed awake, hoping to hear the peaceful breathing of a younger brother being welcomed into the arms of Morpheus. But he was tired from his own exertions in the saddler's workshop, and he fell asleep, leaving Charlie still tossing and turning. In the morning, he was again shocked at his brother's appearance. Without wasting time, even before they got out of their little wooden beds, he demanded the full story. "Come on, I'm going to hear all about this dream, every bit." "You wouldn't believe it." "That's for me to judge." "All right, then. Well, it happens just the same way every night. Don't even know whether I'm awake or asleep when it happens." "When what happens?" "You see, this bed of mine's nearer the door than yours. Every night a horrible old woman comes in that door, makes straight for my bed." "What's she look like? Like Mrs. Carver?" To Jim's delight, he managed to draw a pale smile over the other's face. "No, not she is fat. She seems to be dressed in brown or black, though it's hard to see really, and her long sort of grey-black hair is piled on her head like a bun. Reminds me of someone round these parts, but, well, I just can't remember exactly, but she's terribly strong, grabs me by the neck. I can't possibly call out or do anything, and yet she hardly weighs anything at all. She gets a fix of bridle right over my head. I think it must be one of Mr. Carver's." "Slips a bridle over your head?" "Yes, and a bit between my teeth, Jim. She's so strong I can't possibly stop her, and she gets on my back and kicks me on the other side, just like you kick a horse. Then she makes me carry her round the end of the bed and out through the window, and though we're way up in the air, she seems to get me flying, turns me into a sort of a flying horse, and out we go, her riding on my back." Under Jim's insistent questioning, the rest of the story came out. They rode great distances, but Charlie could not say exactly where. He had a vague idea it was north of Helford River in the direction of St. Mawes. After about an hour's galloping fight, they arrived at the witch's destination, her coven, for there were other witches there. It was a very bleak foreshore between two giant rocks, where she tied him up to a rotting post and then started a babble with other witches. Something foul was always being cooked.
You never get any of it. Oh no, I should be sick. And then what happens? Then she unties me from the post, gets me back, kicks me in the ribs, and we head back for Helston again. We sail down the high street and straight in there through the window. She gets off and very quietly leads me past the end of your bed, drags me into my own, and takes off my bridle, and then... Yes? Then she kisses me. I think this is the worst part of all. She kisses me, and she goes out through the closed door. Oh, Jim, it's horrible. It really is. And indeed, it must be. Jim knew the ring of truth in his brother's voice and could feel his own heart beat fast at the horror of it. There was only one thing to do. Charlie, he announced quietly, we shall change beds tonight. Charlie demurred, for he was fond of his elder brother and hated the idea of his having the same ghastly experience. However, the rejoinder was firm. Remember, I'm 2 years older than you, and everyone says I'm big and strong for my age, so I'd like to have a tussle with this witch of yours. But don't you think we both know about it? We ought to tell Mr. and Mrs. Carver. Maybe, but not until after tonight. That day, the brothers worked especially hard, and Mr. Carver noted that although the younger one was still pale and sickly looking, they both whistled from time to time as they worked. And their work was fine and accurate, too. He felt constrained and congratulate to them, and he said, You're doing a fine job, lads. I think you'll be good in making saddles, the pair of you. The boys mumbled their thanks and went on with the work of stitching 2 bridles. Jim found himself looking at all the bridles on the wall and wondering if any of these had been used by the witch. But no. They were all brand new, beautiful bridles, and they could never have been taken down from their hooks. That evening, sharp at the usual time, they went up to their room. Charlie had been prevailed upon to have a large supper, thick soup with a large pastry, and also almost a quart of beer. Jim, unsmiling, partook of hardly anything, and the Carvers watched with interest as the 2 of them went up the narrow winding stairs for the kitchen. They're a rum pair, those 2, said Mr. Carver. Oh, they're just boys, said his wife. We mustn't worry about them. Did you see how much the little one tucked away tonight? It was proper delighted. And the big one had hardly anything strange. As arranged, the boys swooped and swapped beds, Charlie Williams tonight climbing into the one farthest from the door, and to his older brother's satisfaction, he was soon fast asleep. He was unaware what time he himself dropped off, and never was really clear later on just how long he had slept. But he suddenly awoke with a feeling of great oppression upon him. He looked up and saw the old woman bending over his bed, and there really was a bridle in her hand. Her gray face was lit by the moon streaming in through the bedroom window, and he could see that she was indeed rather fat, but her hair piled up in a ramshackle bun, and was more or less entirely covered by a hideous, shapeless, black or brown dress, of course a material, with a little black cloak about her shoulders. Her round face was not really malevolent, and she did, as Charlie had hinted, remind one of somebody one had seen, maybe in Helston. He let the bridle be slipped over his head, and he even took the bit between his teeth. Obedient to the rider's signals, he lifted her towards the window, feeling her calloused heels dig deep into his ribs. Charlie had been right, and despite her shape and strength, she was weightless. Jim already had his plan. He would wait, though, until they had fleeted out through the attic window. There'd be no point in waking up poor Charlie.
Let him get a decent night's sleep tonight, and Jim would make sure he got one every night from now on. Out of the window they floated. It was rather like swimming through the night air, and Jim Williams found that his limbs took up the motion naturally, as if he'd been carrying weightless witches all his life. In a way, until the fat old thing gave a vicious tweak to the reins, which hurt his mouth, it was quite pleasant. Just swimming through the moon-bright autumn air with something weightless on his back, weightless and so fat. Then, when they were well away from the house, he did it. There was a terrible scream from the old hag as he dragged her down off of his back with one hand and took the bit from between his teeth with the other. But she was so light, even though she had strength, that he had no difficulty in getting her off his back, changing places with her, the bit fitting well in her jaws. "Get moving!" he shouted in triumph. "Tonight's the night. It's my turn to ride, and I want to go fast. We've a long journey, first the Port 11, then off to the Moonlion Cove. After that, down the coast past Kynance to the Lizard Point, and we'll come back up the other side over Cadwith and St. Keverne, across the Goonhilly Downs. They should be fine and misty and wonderful tonight, back here to Helston, and if you don't go fast enough, I'll just kick you till you do." He did, and there was a grunt of pain. "Come on now, I want the back in my bed by dawn." He could see that there were, and after describing an aerial arc around Porthleven, to his surprise, the old woman descended the few feet to ground level, was actually galloping like a horse down the Lizard Road. And as they galloped on, she slowly began to take on the shape of a real horse. First, her strange hair divided on the top of her head and became horse's ears, and the short cloak in front of him changed slowly into long black mane. If he looked down, he could see the short fat fingers, the shapeless shoes, becoming pairs of horse's hooves. Surely no racehorse in history had traveled so far. The sound of its hooves were like a rattle of a drumroll, and it grew faster. They were already in mist, the strange, fascinating sea mist of the Pradneck Downs, where a rider's head can be above it and the rest of him and the horse quite hidden. Occasionally, the top of a tree, one of the very few trees in that barren land, or the roof of a house appeared above it and short by. At Ruan Minor, they turned off to Mullion, had a fine view from the Cove of the Grey, slow-breaking sea across the Mounts Bay, then stormed on past Kynance to the Lizard itself. The moon gave an eerie polish to everything, and he had the strange feeling of riding on a blanket of mist. He was singing with the exhilaration of the night air and the speed when he suddenly noticed his steed was limping. The galloping eased to a limping center, then a walk. Jim dismounted carefully, holding tight the reins to inspect. It was as he had thought. The shoes were worn almost through, and one of them hanging by only a pair of nails. He owed the witch no kindness, God knew, but common sense told him he must wake up some blacksmith and get a new set of shoes put on. Already there was a pale glow in the east, and if he didn't make haste, he and his horse witch would not be back by dawn. As luck would have it, he found an early risen smith working at his bellows in St. Keverne. He stopped his steed and watched as the puffing and huffing blew life into the embers of the anvil, and then he dismounted, still holding the animal firmly by its reins. "Excuse me," he said nervously, suddenly feeling a 13-year-old boy again, not a champion rider, a tamer of witches. "Yes," said the smith. Would you shoe my horse for me? We've come a long way, and she's lame." Jim had not had occasion to ascertain the sex of his steed, but presumably it would be a mare. "Aye, I'll do that for you," said Smith. "Thank you very much. It's very kind of you, at this hour of the morning." "Oh, that's all right. Money's money, whether the sun shines or the moon. And you have got money, have you? To me, you look as if you'd be scrambled out of bed in your nightdress." Jim had a moment of panic, then remembered. This is the way I like to ride at night in these clothes. More freedom. They're not really night clothes, of course, and I have more in this leathern bag around my neck. He took out some silver coins from the bag he always wore this way day and night, and they glistened in the red light from the glowing coals. The smiths got to work. My, these shoes have worn a fair way. You not get much farther like these. I've never seen such shoes. Not even slippers. They aren't. The man laughed at his little joke, and Jim nervously laughed with him. The 4 new shoes were fitted, the nails hammered home, and Jim paid the obliging smith, who took the rather less than the youth had imagined the job was worth. Good luck, he said. Good luck, young fella, and get safely home before your folks see what you've been doing. I must say, though, I admire a lad with spirit. Jim mounted his horse, and galloped away as the genial smith waved his farewell. The beast was running beautifully now, which was just as well, for the sky was becoming quite light. They reached the carver's house in the side street. Right, said Jim. I want you to change back into a witch, or I'll kick you real hard and jump back into the attic window. And not a sound, understand? Obediently, the ears became hair again, a bun, and the rest of the horse became the rest of an old woman. One bound, and they were through the window, Jim clinging on for dear life. And now get out, hissed Jim at the woman. Get out, and never come back. The woman paused for a moment, then turned and slowly went out through the closed door. Charlie woke, stretched himself. Jim had already slithered into the next bed. Oh, Jim, I had a wonderful night's sleep. Not a nightmare, not even a dream, nothing. It was fine. Good, I had a pleasant night, too. Jim had decided not to tell the younger boy what had happened, lest it upset him he start having dreams of a different nature. No, I didn't dream either, but I think we'll stay in these beds from now on. Helston was beginning to stir to a new day, and they could hear the carvers busying themselves below, making breakfast, starting work, and then in the distance came a scream. It grew louder and louder, and they heard Mr. Carver put down something heavy in his workshop and go out the double, up Helston's precipitous high street. The screaming went on. By the time he got back to the house, the boys were up and dressed, and it was their master's turn to look haggard and distraught. What is it? What is it, John Carver? Asked his wife. You look as if you'd seen a ghost. My God, perhaps worse. There's been a fat old woman hanging around the top of the high street for some weeks now. Nobody seemed to know where she came from, even where she stays. Quite a friendly body, they say, but, well, there's something a bit uncanny and unpleasant about her. Oh, come to the point, John Carver. Well, believe me, or believe me not, this old hag sitting there on the ground, screaming her head off in agony, and small wonder there's a brand new horseshoe nailed tight on to each hand and foot. Oh my. Sounds terrible. So this one's called The Witches and the King. "10 miles east of Edinburgh, on the main road to Dunbar, lies the little town of TessaTNT, population 6,000, plus a few hundred. In 1590, it was about a quarter of the size, and its deputy bailey, a municipal officer, something akin to the English deputy mayor, was a certain David Seaton. Maid to David Seaton's household was Gillis Duncan, a kindly woman loved by all, who was always ready to help those in trouble, particularly men and women grieved with any kind of sickness or infirmity. For she possessed, it was generally recognized, remarkable powers of healing. Had she lived in England, Gillis would have been known as a cunning woman or white witch. as it was having performed many matters most miraculous, which things for as much as she began to dote them upon a Sudane, having never done that like before. She was the cause of, and suspected of, having been deeply involved in the case of the North Berwick witches, one of the most famous of British cases of malevolent witchcraft. That Gillis Duncan had no intention of unmasking the North Berwick witches is certain. What happened was this. Gillis, in the habit of not sleeping in the bed provided for her in his house by Deputy Bailey Seaton, and this became known to him. Since masters were responsible under the law for the behavior of all members of their household, Seaton decided to investigate where Gillis went and what she did on her secret nocturnal expeditions. Though admitting that the maid did indeed possess remarkable powers of healing, which powers she could derive from only one of two sources, God or the devil, it occurred to the Bailey that her nightly absences might indicate the latter rather than the former. Perturbed, he called to his house a number of Trinant's leading citizens, so that they might assist at his interrogation of the maid. The better to find out the truth, comments the contemporary Count Bailey Seaton, first tormented her with the torture of pillywinks upon her fingers. Gillis remained silent under the considerable pain caused by his vice-like instrument. So Seaton had her thralled, i.e., a rope was placed around her forehead and tightened as is done with a tourniquet. Thralling is even more painful than the pillywinks, but still Gillis said nothing. Seaton, however, was completely unconvinced by her silence that she was innocent, and ordered that she be searched for the devil's mark. The searchers of Gillis Duncan presently declared that they had found such a mark on the forepart of her throat. At the discovery, the woman's composure forsook her, and she confessed that all her doings was done by the wicked allurements and enticements of Deville, and that she did them by witchcraft. By first torturing Gillis and then having her searched for the devil's mark, Bailey Seaton was acting contrary to accepted practice throughout Europe. But this was by no means an uncommon occurrence in Scotland. There the Scots appeared determined to take no risk where a man's or a woman's soul was concerned. Gillis, like so many of her countrywomen, realized that silence or denial was useless once a mark had been found, even though she might be entirely innocent. On her confession, Seaton at once handed her over to the civic authorities, charging her with witchcraft. Under further interrogation, she incriminated Agnes Sampson of hating. So there's a asterisk here at the bottom, and this print is really tiny. Okay, so the devil's mark that we read about earlier. So it says, the devil's mark was acquired by the witch at her initiation into the devil's service. Satan put his mark on her as a token of his authority over her. Any blemish on the skin, such as a birthmark, scar, or unnatural pigmentation, was regarded as a possible devil's mark. It was always on a part of the body hidden by clothes, and sometimes, according to Levitico Sinistraro, the last of the great demonologists, it is imprinted on the most secret parts of the body, with men under the eyelids, or perhaps in the armpits, or on the lips, or the shoulders, or the anus, or elsewhere. With women, it is generally under the breasts, or on the private parts. Anyone suspected of being a witch or warlock was, therefore, first stripped naked, generally before a large crowd, and all the body hair was shaved off to the skin. If no mark was then visible, the most intimate orifices were searched. The discovery of a mark was inevitable, followed by torture to extract confessions. Okay, so she incriminated Agnes Sampson of Haddington, 17 miles from Edinburgh, Agnes Thompson of Edinburgh, Dr. John Fian, alias John Cunningham, Meister of the School of Saltpans in Lothian, Mistress George Mott of Saltpans, Robert Grierson, a ship's captain, Jeanette Bandelandes the smith, at the bridge of Hollis, and the wife of Seaton's porter. On the following days, Gellis incriminated many others. Among the prominent citizens she denounced was Euphane MacCallian Moscrop, a daughter of Lord Clifterhall and wife of Patrick Moscrop, a wealthy and influential man. Mistress Moscrop, Gellis claimed, had conspired and performed the death of her godfather, and who used her art upon the gentleman being one of the lords and justices of the session for bearing goodwill to her daughter. Another prominent woman was Barbara Napier, sister-in-law of the Laird of Carshagle, who had bewitched to death Archibald, last Earl of Angus. Not only did Gellis specify the nature of their acts of witchcraft, but gave a full account of their activities, and it was this account that attracted the attention of King James VI, so much so, in fact, that he decided to take a personal part in the interrogation of the accused. Agnes Sampson, who was the oldest of all those arrested, was the first to be taken to Holyrood House. She was of a rank and comprehension above the vulgar grave and settled in her answers. She refused point blank to confess, and no blandishment or threat of the king or privy councillors who sat with him could move her. Eventually losing patience, James ordered her to be shaved and searched for the devil's mark. During the search, she was thrown. After an hour of searching, the mark was found. Here privy parts, then she immediately confessed whatsoever was demanded of her in justifying those persons aforesaid to be notorious witches. She now made a full confession to the king. On All Hallows Eve, she told James, she and all the accused together with a company of witches had put to sea, each in a riddle of sieve, and went in the same very substantially with flagons of wine, making merry, and drinking by the way in the same riddles of civils, until they came to North Berwick Church, where they disembarked and joined hands, dancing a reel as they sang, Come here go ye before, come here go ye, give ye will not go before, come here let me. Leading the dance, she said, was Gellis Duncan, playing upon a small trump called a Jew's trump, and so they entered Berwick Church. James at once sent for Gellis and commanded her to play the tune of Come or Go Ye before on a Jew's trump, which she did to his clear delight. When Gellis had finished, Agnes continued her confession. The devil, and there's a little asterisk there, and down below it says, all groups of witches, large or small, had their leader, invariably male, who claimed to be and was accepted as the devil. The devil always took pains to keep himself completely aloof from his followers, except during the ceremonies of the Sabbat, as witches' meetings were called. Alright, so let me find that asterisk to get back to my sport. Where the hell did it go? Okay, so Agnes continued her confession. The devil, in the form of a man, she said, was waiting for them in the church. Apparently, they had taken too long over their singing and dancing, and had kept him waiting, so in penance, he ordered each one to render him the osculum infamum, that is, to kiss his naked posterior, as a sign of duty to him. He sat on the edge of the pulpit as the company filled by the present their duty. This ceremony completed, the devil had then treated them to an harangue, wherein he did greatly away against the King of Scotland. Some of these present had been bold enough to ask why he hated the king so vehemently, and he had said because James was his greatest enemy on earth. He had then demanded that they renew their oath to him, and when this was done, they all returned home. The next day, when Agnes Sampson was again brought before the king, the official account states that she confessed before the king's majesty sundry things which was so miraculous and strange, as that this majesty said they were all extreme liars, whereat she answered she would not wish his majesty to suppose her words to be false, but rather to believe them, and that she would discover such matter unto him as his majesty would not in any way doubt of, and she was as good as her word. The year before, James had married Anne of Denmark in Oslo, which was then under Danish rule. Agnes Sampson now took the king on one side, and, speaking to him in a low voice, declared unto him the very words which passed between the king's majesty and his queen in Norway, on the first night of their marriage, with their answer each to each other. She was sufficiently right to amaze James, who swore by the living God that he believed that all devils in hell could not have discovered the same, acknowledging her words to be most true, and therefore gave more credit to the rest which is before declared. This incident convinced James that the old woman was possessed of supernatural powers, so when she went on to disclose, together with others she had set out to encompass the king's death by witchcraft, he believed all she said. She told James, taken a black toad and hung it up by the hills for 3 days. The venom which dripped from its jaws she had collected in an oyster shell. Some of it she kept in a sealed pot until such time as she could obtain from John Cares, one of the king's attendants and a friend of hers, an article of soiled linen used by James. Unhappily for the success of her plan, Cares had refused to cooperate, but for his refusal she would have bewitched James to death, and put him to such extraordinary pains as if he had been lying upon sharp thorns and ends of needles. Upon the failure of this plan, while James was in Norway, she and some other women had christened a cat, and had them bound each part of it to the chiefest parties of a dead man and several joints of his bodies. On the following night, she and her confederates had sailed to Leith in their sieves, and there deposited the cat. At once, a storm greater than any within living memory had wrecked a ship sailing from Brunt Isle to Leith, carrying jewels and rich gifts for James' queen when she arrived in Leith. The same cat, she claimed, had been responsible for an inexplicable incident that had occurred when James was returning from Scandinavia. His ship, and only his, of all the flotilla accompanying him, had run into a headwind. All the others had a fair wind. By the standards of the day, James, as a well-educated man, but like so many educated men that time, he was very susceptible to any hint of the supernatural, the main embodiment of which was the witchcraft that had reached a new peak throughout Europe towards the end of the 16th century. As for the witches themselves, they seemed hell-bent on fostering the belief in their supernatural powers, which could only eventually encompass their deaths. Though the tortures inflicted by Gaylis Duncan, by Bailey Seton, and on Agnes Sampson by her interrogators were horrible in their sadism, they were nothing compared to the sufferings inflicted on John Fian, alias Cunningham. First, by a throwing of his head with a rope, whereat he would confess nothing. Second, he was persuaded by fair means to confess his follies, but that would avail as little. Lastly, he was put to the most severe and cruel pain in the world, called the boots, who after he had received 3 pokes, being inquired if he would confess his damnable acts and wicked life, his tongue would not serve him to speak, in respect whereof the rest of the witches willed to search his tongue, under which was found 2 pines thrust up under the head, whereupon the witches did lay. Now was the charm stinted, and it showed that those charmed pines were the cause he could not confess anything. Then he was immediately released of the boots, brought before the king. His confession was taken, and his own hand willingly set thereunto, which contained as followeth. So, he declared that he was always present at the general meetings of the witches, describing himself as the clerk of all those that were in subjection to the devil's service. He administered to them the oath of service, and recorded for them the orders which the devil gave him. As much as any woman, the Fian was an ardent believer in the supernatural powers bestowed by witchcraft, and indeed often had recourse to them for his own ends. For example, he claimed that he had bewitched a man living near salt pans because he was in love with a young woman loved by himself. The bewitching caused the man to go temporarily insane once every 24 hours, and each fit lasted 1 hour. He suggested to James that the man should be summoned so that he could demonstrate the truth of his claim. Naturally, James agreed, and the man was summoned to Holyrood House on the 24th of December, 1590. That's a long time ago. So it says here, and when he was brought to his majesty's chamber, suddenly he gave a great scritch and fell into a madness, sometime bending himself, sometime capering so directly up that his head did touch the ceiling of the chamber, to the great admiration of his majesty and others there present. The gentlemen there were quite unable to hold him down until they had sent for assistance. Then they bound him hand and foot and made him lie down until his fit had passed. About an hour later he came to, and James asked him what he saw and did in his fit, to which he replied that he slept soundly all the time. Fian was also declared that he had used witchcraft to attract the young woman to him. Unhappily, the attempt had no success, though its results were somewhat hilarious. Fian also, who was the salt pan's schoolmaster, taught the girl's young brother, and by artful questioning of the boy discovered that he shared a bed with his sister. On learning this, Fian promised to teach the boy without stripes if he would bring him 3 hairs from the young woman's pubes. Naturally, the boy agreed, whereupon Fian gave him a piece of conjured paper in which to wrap the hairs. However, what the boy had thought would be a simple procedure turned out to be very difficult indeed. He made several attempts to attain the hairs after his sister had gone to sleep, but each time she moved in her sleep. Then one night, just as it seemed that he was going to be successful, the girl suddenly sat up in bed and called out to her mother what the boy was trying to do. The mother was also knowledgeable about charms, and though the boy tried to remain loyal to Fian, she beat him with sundry stripes until he told the complete story, whereupon she plucked 3 hairs from the cow's udder and wrapped them in the conjured paper and ordered the boy... Oh, get off me, Elderbox Beetle. And ordered the boy to give them to the schoolmaster. Delighted he would now have his way with the girl, Fian hurried at once to the church and wrought his art upon the hairs. Within... Excuse me. Oh man, I gotta take a drink. Within minutes, the cow appeared at the church doors, trotted up the aisles to Fian, leaping and dancing upon him. To escape the cow's attentions, the schoolmaster fled from the church, but wherever he went, the cow followed him. To the great admiration of all the townsmen of Salt Pans and many others who did beheld the same. So I'm going to take a pause for the cause real quick. We're going to go to our second musical break. On this break, we have Miss Mia Savage. She's going to be singing Lemurian Crypto, Let Me Be Your Home, Your Skeleton, and Our New Reality. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Not if you know.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me, TessaTNT, tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. It's been awesome hanging out with you guys. I'm super excited! Tonight, we are finishing up with the stories that I'm reading you, but tomorrow night, we have Mr. Travis Willier Moose Juice on. But just now, we just got done listening to Miss Mia Savage, who has several different pages under the name of Antidote for Savages, and that's where you can find her music as well as her new song that she just uploaded tonight. So I'm super stoked about that. Make sure you check it out. As I said, tomorrow night we have Mr. Travis Willier Moose Juice on. And this guy is an actor, a writer, a painter, so super talented, and he's got a lot of amazing stories. I cannot wait to hear skinwalkers and other things dealing with the lore of First Nations people, etc. Like, so many different experiences. I am super excited to have him on. I'm super excited that, he came through on break, and we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it to it. So excited. We've been talking about this for a while, but yeah, it just now came through on this awesome music break. I'm super stoked. Alright, so let's see, where did we leave off? Alright, so they plucked the hair from the cow's udder, so on and so forth. The cow was just like following this guy around all over the place. So the incident became widely known, and since it was believed that the schoolmaster had put a spell on the cow with the devil's help, thereupon the name of the said Dr. Fian, who was but a very young man, began to grow so common among the people of Scotland that he was secretly nominated for a notable conjurer. This reputation and his demonstration of bewitching the girl's lover had played a large part in landing him in his present predicament. A new mark could not be found, however, so James devised a most strange torment to make him confess. Fionn's nails were pulled out with pincers. Ew! And where the nails had been, 2 needles were driven in up to their heads. The pain must have been insupportable, but Fionn remained firm in his denials, so he was condemned to the boots once more. But though under this ghastly torture his legs were crushed and beaten together, as small as might be, and the bones and flesh so bruised, whereby they were made unserviceable forever, Fionn would not admit to having made a new pact with the devil. James, seeing at last that nothing would make the young men speak, ordered Fionn to be tried and sentenced to the penalties prescribed by law. Accordingly, on the last Saturday of January, 1591, Fionn was thrown into a cart and taken to Castle Hill in Edinburgh. There he was strangled before a huge crowd, and his body was thrown into the fire already prepared for this purpose. Galis Duncan and Agnes Sampson had already paid the penalty. Little is known about the others who had been arrested with them except Barbara Napier, sister-in-law of Laird of Carsoggle, and Dame Ephraim MacCallion Mosscrop, daughter of Lord Cliftonhall. The jury had heard the case against Mistress Napier, had the temerity to find her not guilty. On hearing the verdict, James flew into a rage, and recalling the court, ordered the judge to sentence her to be burned at the stake, having first been strangled, her property to be forfeited to the crown. He also had the jury tried for willful error on assize, acquitting a witch. Mistress Napier pleaded pregnancy, and after a time, nobody insisting in pursuit of her, she was set at liberty. Dame Euphame's trial was also not without incident. The foreman of the jury refused to condemn her, so he was dismissed, and a new juryman, who had not sat on the trial jury, was brought in, and a unanimous verdict was then returned. Perhaps because he was a Roman Catholic, James ordered that she be burned in ashes to death. That is, without the merciful strangling that almost invariably preceded burning at the stake in such cases. The sentence was carried out on July 25th, 1591. The remainder of the defendants were strangled and burned during February 1592. The acquittal of Barbara Napier occasioned James' famous Tolbooth speech, which was on June 7th, 1591, in which he set out his own firm belief in witchcraft. 6 years later, the king published in Edinburgh his Demonology, written in the classical tradition of the European demonologists, having come to the throne of England in 1602, and found that the laws against witches in his new realm were less fearsome than those north of the border. In 1604, he placed on the statute book a bill which provided for much harsher penalties for Englishmen found guilty of witchcraft than had been provided by Elizabeth I's statute in 1563. There is no doubt that it was James's personal involvement in the North Berwick case which confirmed him in his belief, as he said in the Tolbooth speech, that witchcraft was as most abominable sin. We are taught by the laws of both God and man that this sin is most odious, and by God's law punishable by death. By man's law it is called maleficium or beneficium, an ill deed or poisonable deed, and punishable likewise by death. He remained a staunch antagonist of witchcraft throughout his life. This next story is The Ghostly Wherry of Oulton Broad. We were fishing under a full moon near to midnight on Oulton Broad, that lovely Suffolk lake which lies inland from Lowestoft. The moon silvered the water. Grasshopper warbles, the ruler birds of the old marshmen, reeled their tiny, unending song from the acres of tall reeds which surround the broad. Wild duck quacked softly in reedy bays. Ashore a solitary light gleamed, yellow from a house across the dark waters of that bay, which they call Barrow's Ham. A tawny owl hooted eerily from the dark, brooding pines on a little knoll by the water's edge. There, in the last century, on just such a night, George Borrow, that writer of resounding English, the man who wrote Lavengro and the Romany Rye, the two greatest sagas of gypsy life in the English language, lit a great bonfire under the trees, and surrounded by the dark faces of his gypsy friends, their eyes dancing in the firelight, drank his wine, and roared the wild Romany songs to the stars. Neighbors thought him mad. None dare say so, for Borrow was a man of strength and sinew, a great walker, and, if tackled, a great fighter. Did he not walk hundreds of miles through the sun-baked mountains of Spain, a land of bandits and loneliness, simply to get an atmosphere for that other classic of his, The Bible in Spain? There was the morning when he stepped out of the house, said to his loving wife, who luckily understood him, "I'm going for a walk, my dear. Don't know when I shall be back." He was away 3 months without a change of clothes. They say that he walked across England, right into Scotland, and then walked home again. A friend of his said of this rough, devil-may-care master of the English language, he was very fond of ghost stories and believed in the supernatural. Those words rang in my mind as I turned to Fred the boatman and said, "Fred, we're fishing right off Mr. Barrow's own bay within sight of his old wooden summer house, where he used to tell his ghost stories. Surely he must haunt the place. Have you ever seen him?" "Not as I know on," said Fred thoughtfully. "These heroed broads are full of ghosts and rum-old tales. There's Black Shuck and great old dog, big as a calf, with only one eye on his head, what shines like a bike lamp. And there's a ghost, they say, of an old monk in Castle ruins, but I don't think nothing o' that. The head ghost in these here parts is the Mayfly. Ever hear o' she? She's due here to sail across this broad half after midnight on June 24th. Though if you see her, you'll drop dead." Vaguely, I'd heard the story. Here and there is whispered. Many laugh at it, but the facts, such as they are, seem to point to truth. The great white wherry, built of oak and teak, bluff bowed, built on the lines of ancient Egyptian riverboats with the white eye of Osiris painted on either side of the bows, sweeps across the broad under a mighty press of white sails, a great wave curling away on either side. Aboard the ghostly ship Blood, Stevenson, the skipper, a giant of a man, wrestles the slim, terrified figure of a girl in a white nightdress, a ghastly gash in her neck, blood pouring down. Suddenly, the girl, screaming with terror, lunges her right hand upwards. The skipper, blood spurting from his throat, collapses on deck. A second later, the girl, with a dying shudder, falls limp and lifeless across the body of the man who is known to have murdered at least 3 men in his time, and the white ship sweeps on. Now all this began in the autumn of 1851, when a firm of the Malströms Beckles, that adorable little Suffolk town of history and beauty, which sits on the banks on that river of enchantment, the Waveney, decided to send their champion wherry, the Mayfly, on a voyage which was to make one of the most horrifying, macabre chapters in the English lore of the supernatural. First of all, what is the wherry? Only 1 or 2 are left in their unspoiled historic form on the boards of Norfolk and Suffolk today. They are one of the oldest ship designs in the world. As such, they deserve more than a passing mention, since this is possibly the only story of a haunted wherry in existence. I described wherries thus in my Portrait of the Broads a few years ago. The Norfolk wherry is unique among boats. There was nothing quite like it in Holland. Nothing approached it in design or appearance upon the once wide meres and great rivers of the fens. That in itself is remarkable, for the wherry was primarily trading ship in the not far off days when marsh farmers and those whose land abutted on coastal creeks and estuaries sent perhaps 3/4 of their produce by water. Roads were deep in mud for 6 months of the year. Farm roads were bottomless. Within my own time, wherries were an everyday sight. To see a wherry, long, though with broad-bosomed bows, sweeping huge and bat-like down a river or through a reedy channel, with its great sail towering high above the marshland scene and touching the reeds, was more than impressive, almost awe-inspiring. They were in Medway, the Thames, the Essex Blackwater, and the Suffolk estuaries. Those were the greatest sailing ships in the world to be worked solely by a man and a boy. The wherry, of somewhat different construction, was their young inland brother, although occasionally they took to salt water. The average wherry was long and shallow, with a towering mast and a vast sail rigged on the principle of the old-fashioned Una rig, but with a boom. They were from 70 to 20 tons burden and crewed by 2 men and occasionally by 1 man only. They could sail very fast, extremely close to the wind, and were so handy they could be navigated among other craft in a narrow river reach, to within an inch or so without scraping paint. There was a tiny cabin In the stern, the steersman stood abaft of this against the tiller with the sheet working on the horse. On the cabin roof in front of him, the masts moved in the fulcrum. The lower end was weighted, so the one man working full sail could easily lower or raise it. I have been lucky enough to see and occasionally sail with some of the last of the wherries. Today, what few trading wherries are left on the Broads have auxiliary motors. The old Albion, which was saved by Norfolk wherry, trust is, I believe, the last one which propelled solely by sail. Such then, this almost vanished type of sailing craft under full sail and fully laden, a wherry could quite easily reach a speed of 7 to 8 miles per hour, almost the rate of a London taxi traveling through Hyde Park. The return to our tale, back to the autumn of 1851. The Mayfly, white painted and shining, ship-shape from truck to keel, was lying at the Staith of Beckley's. Her owner sent for the captain, a hairy, broad-shouldered giant nicknamed Blood Stevenson. Immensely powerful, he was a redoubtable boxer at the time when barefist prize fighting was the popular craze. Jim Mace and Tom Sayers were the heroes of the day. It was said that if Blood Stevenson had been properly trained and financially backed, he could have been in a class fit almost to fight and barefist champion of England. Instead, he had been at sea most of his life. He had a brutal temper and a murderous look in his eyes when roused. It was whispered that whilst the Merchant Navy, where he served 15 years before the mast, he fought 5 men aboard the ship single-handed, killed 2 of them, and brutally injured the others. For this, he went to jail for 3 years. When he came out, he served aboard a Yankee hot ship, got mixed up in another fight off the Florida coast, and, with the police hot after him, jumped his ship and got a berth on another sailing immediately for England. By this time, he had such a bad reputation in the merchant service that he decided to find a job aboard one of the trading wherry fleets of the Norfolk and Suffolk rivers. Thus he came into the employ of the Beckless firm of maltsters. One of the directors, Mr. Dormy, had a beautiful daughter in her early 20s. She was the belle of town and admired by every man who saw her. Blood was one of her admirers. So was Jack, the mate of Mayfly. Whereas Blood looked on his lovely and innocent girl with brutish animal lust, Jack, also a powerfully built man, worshipped her shyly. Like most of the wherrymen, the wherry berthed near a village on Sundays. Like most of the wherrymen, he was a strong man, civil-spoken, and a devout chapel-goer. Wherever the wherry berthed near a village on Sundays, Jack put on his best Sunday-go-to-meeting dark suit and walked across the marshes to sing a hymn and say a prayer. Thus, Mr. Dormy's beautiful daughter, Millicent, had 2 very different types of admirers. The only other member of the crew was a strong, marsh-born youth of 17 called Bert Entwistle. Every dirty job aboard ship fell to Bert's lot. From scrubbing the decks to peeling the spuds, he never complained. When Blood went ashore that September evening and was ushered into the town's office at the Maltings, Mr. Dormy came straight to the point. Captain Stevenson, we have decided to entrust you with a highly important mission. A large chest containing gold coins has to be sent from here to our bank in Yarmouth. We have good reason to believe that it goes by horse and cart along the dark roads. It will be held up and robbed. We are therefore sending a horse and cart with a large box aboard, which will contain not gold but 2 armed men. Whoever stops the vehicle will get a charge of shot instead of a box of gold. We have decided, therefore, that it will be safer to send this very precious cargo by water. You are a strong, powerful man. So is your mate Jack. A third deckhand will be provided as an extra guard. You will be given shotguns and a supply of cartridges. We feel, however, it is unlikely that anyone will think of intercepting the berry, more especially as my daughter, Miss Millicent, will travel aboard as a passenger with a large box containing the gold, ostensibly as her luggage. We would like you to undertake this highly important and confidential job. I shall be honored, gentlemen, Blood replied. May I be permitted to ask the value of the cargo? 400,000 pounds, said Mr. Dormy coolly. Blood caught his breath. His eyes narrowed. A very valuable cargo for inland waters, gentlemen, he observed. Although, naturally, as captain of trading ships aboard, I have been entrusted with far more valuable cargoes. That we fully expected, Captain Stevenson, was the reply, and that is why we have decided to entrust you with the cargo. You will start at 10:30 tonight, half an hour after the cart leaves by road for Yarmouth, and you will disembark Miss Millicent at Yarmouth, where her aunt will be waiting for her, and the box will be transferred to the lady's carriage, which will then be driven to the bank. Is all clear? All clear, gentlemen, said Blood smartly. He saluted and withdrew. Millicent Dormy, tall, beautiful, flushed with excitement, thrilled at the idea of the trip, went aboard the Mayfly. A special cabin had been made for her in part of the extensive hold. Apart from the excitement of the trip, she was secretly elated to be traveling with Blood, who in her girlish eyes was a sort of a Greek hero, some kind of Achilles or Hercules. She had quite a passion for him in a strictly decorous way. In due course, the Mayfly cast off her warps and under a full-bellying mainsail swept down the river. A great white ghost ship, stately under the moon, 15 miles to go, and Millicent would have been having breakfast with her aunt in their townhouse in Yarmouth. The wherry swept downstream past Worlingham, skirted Olton Broad, headed north to Berg St. Peter and Somerleyton, and under the Roman ruins of Berg Castle, burst suddenly upon the full tidal flood water of Braden Water, a semi-saltwater lake of strong currents covering more than 1,000 acres, which extends from Castle Hill to the docks of Great Yarmouth. Blood Stevenson was at the wheel. It is a local legend that as a seagoing captain, he had insisted on a wheel being fitted instead of the long-handled tiller of the usual wherry. As the Great Bluff bowed, ship hit the incoming tide, bucketed slightly, and threw up a sheet of spray. Blood turned suddenly to the third deckhand and said in a fierce undertone, Are you with me or not on this trip? Are you for me or not? Of course I'm with you, said the deckhand. What do you mean? For you, thou? I mean this, said Blood fiercely. This ship, everything aboard, it is now mine. I'm the skipper. I own the lot. This ship goes where I say it will go. Now do you understand? But you can't say it's your ship, the man retorted. It belongs to the governor. You can't steal it. That's piracy. I'm no bloody pirate. Then you're bloody fish fodder, Blood retorted. He abandoned the wheel, swung his deadly right, caught the deckhand full on point with the jaw, and knocked him senseless. He picked up the body and swung it overboard. An almighty splash, and Mayfly surged on towards the lights of Yarmouth, a dead man bobbing in the long, creamy wake astern, not eastern, sorry. The breeze freshened, the great ship stormed along, white and magnificent. She swept past the docks and wavers and quays and fishboats of Yarmouth. She plunged her bows into the North Sea, stretching to infinity under the moon. The Mayfly dipped her bows, took it green, slid and wallowed in the long roller of the sea. Soon the lights of Yarmouth were well astern. The ship's bows were pointed to Holland. Down below, Millicent Dormy was awakened by the sudden pitch and wallow of the ship. She came on deck to find out what was happening. Well, Captain, she inquired, haven't we reached Yarmouth? I can't see any land. You won't see any, sweetheart, Blood replied brusquely. We've left Yarmouth behind. We're at sea. But why? She asked. We're supposed to stop at Yarmouth. My aunt will be waiting for me. You'll never see Yarmouth or your aunt again, my sweetie, came the brutal reply. We're going where I decide to go. I'm captain of this ship. She goes where I says she'll go. Everything aboard, including the money, and you, my girl, belongs to me. You'll be my wedded wife. When we reach foreign parts, we've enough money to live like lords and ladies forever. But it's my father's money, my father's ship, she retorted suddenly, cold with fear. You'll never see your father, Blood answered shortly. Get down to your cabin. I've wanted you for a long time. Now you're mine. Jack, take the wheel. Jack, the mate, stepped forward. He took the wheel and gazed ahead with a face of stone. Millicent Dormy stood pale and defiant on the deck. Blood picked her up with one powerful arm, dropped her down in the companionway, and followed. Minutes later, there came an agonized, horrifying scream from below. Millicent Dormy rushed up the companionway, bleeding from a gash in the neck. Her clothes were half torn off. Blood stumbled after her. He also was spattered with blood. It was too much for Jack. He sprang at Blood. The two giants grappled like tigers, lurched back and forth across the deck. They were pretty well matched. They fought, kicked, stumbled, fell, still locked together. Then suddenly, Blood drew back and that deadly right arm and hit Jack with a sledgehammer blow on the jaw, which almost certainly broke his neck. As the whip wallowed in the North Sea, Blood hurled the body of Jack overboard. Millicent bolted below. Blood followed. Then as Bert the boy, roused from his forecastle slumber, stumbled on deck, he saw Blood and the girl come up the companionway again. Blood attempted to grip her with his ape-like arms. Bert saw her swing her own delicate right arm. A sudden spurt of blood from the captain's throat and coughing up his heart blood, the murderer collapsed on deck. A moment later, the girl, stabbed to the heart, fell across his dead body. The boy, terrified, out of his wits, stumbled into the dinghy astern, piled into it and a keg of water, food, and a bottle of rum, loaves of bread, a gun, and cartridges. He cut the painter and was left bobbing, dead scared and alone in the North Sea, while the great white ship, spattered in blood, with a dead man and a dead girl aboard, surged on its voyage alone into the unknown. Days later, the boy was rescued by a Dutch ship. He swore that while alone in that small boat on the second or third dark night of terror, the great white ship, sails full of wind, had swept down on him in a phosphorescent glow from stem to stern, and had circled him. Aboard the ship, he saw the struggling figures of the girl in her torn nightdress, smothered in blood, and the giant blood bleeding from the stab in the throat which killed him. 3 years later, said Fred, my boatman, that night on Olton Broad, Mr. Dormy was fishing right here with the boatman, same as we are tonight. Suddenly, across the broad, lit up in a glow, the mayfly, white and ghostly, swept down upon them. Mr. Dormy, sat paralyzed as the ship passed, and the ghost of his daughter, fighting off blood, screamed, Father, save me, save me! Then the mayfly vanished. You could smell sulphur in the air. There was a thud in the boat. Mr. Dormy had dropped dead, his fishing rod still in his hand. Very nice. So we have another story. I don't know if we should start it or not. Oh, it appears as if we have a knock at the door. Who can it be? Hello?
Look what I got.
Oh. And what is that called?
I don't really remember, but look. So I pulled the string. I was making it wrap. Oh, that's not mean Floyd. That's Herc.
Why?
I don't know.
Well, he needs to get out of your room. There's a reason you have a gate. Hey, go deal with it right now. Get him out. Tell your dad to get him out.
Okay.
That's ridiculous. I don't know if he's searching for a cat or a mouse or what the crack is going on. But this book has been pretty cool so far. It's a little long-winded, I would say, but I mean, there are different sections with different stories. And I can get into this one. It's a very short one. It's called The Lost Soul of Mrs. Lakey. Father, mother, help! Grandmother is choking! The child's screams rang through the house and ended with the hideous noise of choking. The parents rushed to her room. They found her dead in the bed with the marks of 2 fingers on her throat. She had been strangled. This was the most horrific manifestation of evil ghost of Mrs. Lakey. In life, she had been such a dear old lady, living in the 18th century Minehead, Somerset, with her son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter. She was kindly, gentle, considerate, and much beloved. Neighbors admired her saintly ways and told her son how lucky he was to have such a mother. One of their admirers said to her once, "You are such a wonderful person that the only tragedy is that you'll have to die one day and leave us all." For Mrs. Lakey was getting on in years. Unexpectedly, she responded to this remark with, "You may like me now, but I'm afraid you won't enjoy seeing and speaking to me after death." "How could we ever see and speak to you then?" "Wait and you see," said Mrs. Lakey. They waited, and they saw. Mrs. Lakey died. She had a grand funeral and lots of mourners. People wept, said what a darling she'd been, how much they'd miss her. "So terrible that we shall never see her again," they cried. But many of them were to see her again quite soon, at different times and places, and she had turned into a real old devil, as if to make up for all the goodness and patience she had shown in life. Perhaps she had been longing to break out for all these years, and only death gave her the chance to show what it was really like behind her gentle facade. A local doctor was one of the first people to see her ghost, although he didn't know who it was at the time. It was a lovely day, and he was walking in the fields. He met an old lady, greeted her politely, and helped her to climb over a stile. He realized there was something odd about her because when she spoke, her lips didn't seem to move, and her eyes stayed staring fixedly before her even when she turned her head. Her oddness made him feel uneasy, so he was glad to say goodbye to her and hurry across the next field. As he approached the stile on the other side, he saw to his astonishment that she was there, sitting on it. No human being could possibly have got there ahead of him without moving very fast indeed, and indeed, he'd have seen her run past him. He almost turned back the way he'd come, but told himself not to be foolish and went on towards the stile. As he approached, she didn't move aside. She sat there, preventing him from climbing over. "Excuse me, madam. I want to get over here. Suppose I don't want you to?" "That's absurd. Now, please!" She laughed and sat firm like a mischievous child. "Let me help you over to the other side," he said. And "I'm on the other side already." Tired of argument, he climbed over, pushing her out of the way, and she gave him a vicious parting kick and shouted after him, "That'll teach you to show better manners the next old lady you meet." Later, he described the old woman to friends, and they said it was Mrs. Lakey, who had recently started to reappear. The recent events which the doctor described were fairly typical of her newly assumed unpleasantness. She turned up just anywhere and made a nuisance of herself. One of her favorite tricks was to appear on a quay in the Minehead and call for a boat. "Hey, a boat! Hey there, you lazy devils, I want a boat!" At first, one boatman or another would go across to her, only to be cursed and sent away again. Then they began to ignore her, or try to, and she would stand there swearing and scaring everyone to death. When she was alive, she had been angelic to her son. Nothing was too good for him. She had made sacrifices for him, waited on him, given him presents, and seemed to worship the ground he trod on. But her returned spirit detested him and planned to ruin him. He was a prosperous man, a trader who did a lot of business with Ireland. Always, he had several ships sailing between Ireland and England, carrying goods from one place to the other. The ghost of Mrs. Lakey formed the grim plan of sinking his ships. As one of Lakey's ships approached land, Mrs. Lecky would appear standing at the mainmast and blow a whistle. However calm the weather, the sound of this whistle called up a violent storm, wrecking the ship and scattering the goods. Sometimes the seamen managed to swim ashore, but invariably everything else was lost. Ship after ship was destroyed in this way, and so was her son's prosperity. He grew desperate. All his own ships were lost, and he could no longer afford to buy new ones. Even if he managed to hire a ship, he couldn't get any seamen to sail in her, as they all knew the fate of the Lecky ships. Many of them had heard the weird sound of that whistle in the mainmast, seen and felt the violence of the magic storms, and had felt themselves lucky to escape with a fright and a wedding. When she wasn't busy sinking his ships, she haunted her son's house, so that he could have no peace anywhere. She had a particularly sinister way of going about this, for she never let her son actually see her. She appeared to others in the house, reducing them to the state of hysterics, and this in turn distressed Lecky. But as he never saw her, he couldn't do anything about it. Seeing a malevolent ghost is bad enough, but not to see one which those whom love you are seeing all the time is even worse. The son could detect her presence, though the signs of fear his wife and daughter showed, but B was completely helpless to do anything about it. For instance, his ghostly mother would come to his bedroom when he and his wife were in bed together. There would be poor Lecky trying to get some sleep, and his wife would suddenly cry out, "Look, there's your mother in the room with us." Lecky would turn to the right. There his wife pointed to see nothing. "She's on the other side now," his wife would say. Lecky would look left, nothing. The wicked old ghost would manage to slip from the place to place, so that he always missed seeing her. There was an element of comic about these repeated bedroom scenes. Except for the people involved. Lecky's wife was nearly going mad with the constant torment, and Lecky himself was enraged in frustration. He felt so damned helpless. He'd never had any trouble at all with his beloved mother, but her ghost was quite beyond him. Neighbors giggled sometimes when they heard of the goings-on at the house, and it was mortifying and embarrassing for Lecky's, especially with their business in ruins and their poverty increasing day by day. Then came the shocking climax of their daughter's house. They had learnt to endure the ghost's persecution of themselves, but even they had not convinced that she would hurry... Oh, bug is crawling on me. Freaking box elder beetle. That she would hurt their child, a dead little girl with the marks of 2 fingers on her throat, and her last cry, "Grandmother is choking me!" It was the last straw. Everything had gone. The child's funeral was a tragic affair. There were people who had envied Lecky's former prosperity and taken snide pleasure in seeing him ruined, and others who had laughed at the haunting of the marriage bed. But none could feel anything but horror at the death of the child. The ghost of Mrs. Lecky had gone too far. She was hated now as much as she had once been loved. Perhaps the force of people's emotions had some effect on her. Perhaps, like a child in some terrible otherworld second childhood, she had not entirely known what she was doing, had not been able to distinguish the crucial dividing line between mischief and murder. But the horror she had invoked reached her at last. She even came with a half apology. It was after the child's funeral. The bereaved young mother dragged herself to her bedroom and began listlessly to arrange her hair before the mirror. Suddenly, she saw Mrs. Lecky's face reflecting in it and peering over her shoulder. She turned, desperate with misery and quite beyond fear. "For God's sake, Mother, why do you torture us?" "Peace," Mrs. Lecky said softly. "I shan't hurt you." "What do you want of me?" The ghost of Mrs. Lecky didn't seem to know what she wanted. She had ruined her son and daughter-in-law and broken their hearts. Why? She didn't know. She was a lost soul. Her acts of mischief became less virulent now, but of course it was too late for the damage she had done to be undone. Lecky and his wife lived at the rest of their lives poor and childless. But even after they were dead, the ghost of Mrs. Lecky was not forgotten. For many years afterwards, it was said that the ghost still haunted the quay in Minehead, and seamen approaching land still listened for that unearthly whistle which presaged a storm. Perhaps they still do. Well, we finished that old chapter there. Man, this is Lucky's a biatch. B-I-E-I-O.
Have you known how long I've been standing right here watching you?
Yeah, I do.
Then why were you ignoring me?
Because I can't pay attention to you and read at the same time, you know. You're lucky I even unlocked the door, so I don't even know why you're talking right now when you see that I am still doing my show.
Why did you unlock the door?
Alright, so like I said, we're very lucky. Tomorrow night, we have Mr. Travis Willier. He's an actor, writer, painter. He's been acting since 2015 up to date. Currently, Travis Willier has 2 sci-fi novels online on royalroad.com, where he publishes under the namer Radiant Summer Moon. His books are named Levitation, Me, and Stilted Water's Edge. Travis is a production assistant on the APTN show called Secret History of the Wild West, and Travis Willier grew up in the northern Alberta, Canada on a reservation where he learned a lot from his uncle Russell, who was a medicine man of the area, from ancient traditions to ancient stories and tales. I am so super excited to have him on. Yay! So we got Travis Willier on tomorrow night. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me tonight. And thank you for being my friend, our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, Periscope, iHeartRadio, and wherever else beyond the Omniverse you may be listening tonight. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again tomorrow night when, like I said, we have Mr. Travis Willier on. I cannot wait. He's got so many amazing stories, and I just love people's accounts and stories and things that have happened in their lives. I know we're all going through a difficult time right now with COVID once again rearing its ugly head, but you guys, don't forget, we are all in this together. Together, we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. So if you guys want to join us on the Skype after party, just look me up and send me a contact request at tessa.n.thomas30 or give me a jingle at 970-335-9596. Until next time, nighty-night, love and light. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I will see you back here same time, same place. Take care of my yous.